Hi, this is Starkie Sowers, Director of Education for Clark's Nutrition and Natural Foods Market. Welcome again to another Plus Program training series. This is part 2 of Exploring Teas. All right, so looking at the board, one of the things we talked about in the first part was the fact that green tea actually was originated, so to speak, the consumption of it was originated from the Chinese. And so when we look at the Emperor Shennong, he actually was credited for being the first individual to consume green tea. And so what was unique about that is it was considered medicinal or medicine for so many dynasties, so to speak. It wasn't until the Ming Dynasty that we actually see green tea being consumed as a beverage of choice. And that was roughly about 618 AD, which is, of course, some 3,000 years later. So very unique in its applications. Green tea has a great popularity, but at the same time, a very interesting history of thousands of years of just being considered a medicine. All right, so what we're going to do in this series is we're going to kind of dissect some of the green teas a little bit deeper. So looking a little bit from the first part, we looked at green tea and, of course, some of the benefits of the polyphenol compounds as a strong antioxidant, specifically very preventional, so to speak, in preventing heart disease and also certain types of cancers. One of the things that we know about green tea is from some of the epidemiological studies is individuals that consume green tea on a regular basis, they have less incidences of certain types of cancers and also cardiovascular disease. Along that line as well as the white tea. And so when we look at white tea, remember that the white tea is the same exact plant that was picked early in the first part of the year, usually within the first 1 or 2 days when the leaves are just starting to bud, so to speak. And that one being one of the highest in polyphenols and also the lowest in caffeine. Very kind of unique, and we're going to have a look at this at the end. We're going to look at the caffeine content between all the different types of teas. But I thought for sure what we should do in this segment is kind of look at some of the Japanese teas, especially since the 1970s and 1980s. The Japanese infiltration of their teas into the American marketplace, so to speak, has been very strong, especially in our stores. There's a couple different brands, Choice being one of them. We've marketed these teas for a long period of time. So I thought we'd kind of delve into a little bit of those. So looking specifically at these Japanese teas, obviously green tea, a very different situation, typically known as bancha tea. And so when we look at bancha tea, it's just simply the green tea as we know it. And then also what is known as kokicha, which actually is my favorite tea. And so what's nice about that is it's actually not only the leaves themselves, but also the twigs. And so what's unique about this is they take it, they roast it, it's not fermented at all, and then it's dried, and then it's used as a tea beverage, considered probably the best tea for children as well as for seniors. Almost being a senior myself, I actually enjoyed this particular twig tea for many decades. And what I like about it is I like the real deep, rich flavor. But the interesting thing, as you'll see at the end, it's the least out of all of them to have caffeine. So it's got the smallest amount of caffeine content. All right. So then next on the list, we actually see matcha. And so matcha, once again, is a little bit different than bancha. And what's happened here is actually powdered green tea. And so what happens is when it comes to the ceremonial types of teas in Japan, the matcha tea is actually the ceremonial tea and it's powderized. A lot of people enjoy that, not only in bag, but also powder added to different types of brewing techniques. And then finally, gin matcha, which actually takes the matcha a little bit different, doesn't powderize it, but blends it with brown rice. And so kind of gives a very robust, almost kind of like a grainy flavor, but a very unique flavor in itself. It's a great one to try, especially like maybe during the winter months and things of that nature. Definitely one of my favorites. And so then finally, last on the list is what so many people love, which is the jasmine tea. Kind of a neat story about the jasmine tea is they take the green tea leaves and actually lay them out. And then at night, what they do is they take the jasmine flowers and then they lay them over the top of them and basically let them sit overnight. Then they remove them the next morning and kind of taste the tea to see if the strong flavor is where they, of the jasmine flower is there. And then ultimately putting them back on again and back and forth until they finally get to the flavor or the taste of whatever tea purveyor that's there. So, and obviously, when you look at jasmine tea, it's probably the most popular in Chinese restaurants and things of that nature. But not only a product of China, but also a product of Japan. Unique in this situation, we actually see the use of green tea. Typical tea that you're going to find in a Chinese restaurant is actually black tea along with the jasmine flowers. And sometimes it's just ground together and put together. All right. So with that note, we're going to look at the black teas. And so when we look at the black teas, you can't think of India. we can't not think of India, because India ultimately is probably the number one manufacturing area or cultivating area for black teas. And some of the most famous black teas come from India. The first on the list is what we call the orange pekoe tea. It's one of the ones that we typically see like in Lipton teas. And it's one of the reasons why there's tea consumption all over the United States. As we said earlier, that probably 90% of all tea consumption actually boils down to black tea. All right. So orange pekoe is the typical flavor that you're going to see, but there's a couple other unique ones that we're going to look at. So one thing that we talked about in the first session was how tea grown in different topographical areas produces different types of flavors. So when we look at Darjeeling tea, which is a kind of an interesting enunciation, this particular tea is actually a southern province, specifically in India, and it produces a very robust, a very nice, warm flavor that's not very sharp. And it's just a great flavor, a great taste. And then next on the list is Russian caravan tea. And that is a tea that is, if you want just a kick tea, so to speak, as well as a very strong flavor. This is a very tannic acid flavor, a little bit higher in caffeine, very, very strong bolt of tea flavor. I definitely can't emphasize that enough. Very unique flavor, definitely fun to have around. All right, and then finally, what we call the English teas, grown in Sri Lanka, which is an island that's south of India. And when we look at that tea, they actually add what is known as bergamot oil to it, and that produces what we call English breakfast, and which is a real common in the United States tea as well, of course, in England, all throughout Europe, and typically add a little bit of milk to that. That's kind of the style that they drink with it. So finally, we're going to look at the caffeine contents, and what you'll notice, everything kind of compares to a cup of coffee, which usually has about 150 to 200 milligrams of caffeine. And as we go down, we see black tea being at the top. And then ultimately, when we get to the bottom, the twig tea would be about the least, and the white teas. And kind of gives you an idea, if you want to be a little sensitive on your caffeine consumption, on which tea to use. All right, this is Starkie Sowers, Director of Education, thanking you for watching another Plus Program training series.